They say the sky doesn't care who you are. It only opens to those who dare to reach for it. Miles Carter had spent his whole life looking up. As a boy, he'd lie on his rooftop in South Atlanta, tracing the flight paths of planes with his finger, imagining the stories of each traveler overhead. While other kids dreamed of fame or fast cars, Miles only wanted one thing: a seat in the cockpit, not as a passenger, but as the one commanding the sky. At 16, that dream felt closer than ever. He clutched the laminated badge in his hand like it was made of gold. It bore his name, Miles Carter, and below it, the words, Skynova Youth Aviation Experience Program. Fewer than 30 students across the country had been selected. He had earned his place through an essay that didn't just talk about planes. It spoke of passion, persistence, and a quiet love passed down from a father who had once dreamed of flying himself. Today was orientation. He had arrived early at the terminal of Skynova Airlines, dressed modestly but neatly, wearing the badge on a lanyard around his neck. Tanya Nguyen from HR had welcomed him personally, smiled warmly, and said, "You can wait here in the pilot's lounge. Your guide will be with you shortly." The room was quiet. Warm sunlight filtered through the wide windows, casting reflections across the polished floors. A flat-screen TV played a documentary on early commercial aviation. Miles sat down, backpack at his feet, his eyes locked on the screen. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't fidget. He watched, absorbed, focused. He belonged here, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like it. Until the door opened. Click. The sound of heels across tile broke the quiet like a ripple through still water. Enter Captain Lorraine Beckett, a veteran pilot with silver-streaked hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that comes from decades in command. Her uniform was immaculate, her presence even more so. She stopped as soon as she saw him. Her gaze lingered too long. Not the glance of curiosity, the stare of suspicion. Miles stood instinctively, trying to be respectful. "Good morning, ma'am," he said softly. "I'm Miles Carter. I'm with the Skynova program." "Who let you in here?" she cut in, voice clipped. "I was told to wait here by Miss Nguyen from HR. She gave me this badge." Captain Beckett strode forward, eyes narrowing. Without warning, she snatched the badge from around his neck. The plastic lanyard snapped, startling Miles. She flipped the ID over in her hand and scoffed. "This isn't valid," she said sharply. "Kids don't get access to this lounge. This is a restricted area. You need to leave." Miles froze, heart racing. "But it's real. Ms. Nguyen gave it to me this morning. I'm not trying to—" Her hand was already on her walkie-talkie. "Security to the pilot lounge. Possible intruder. Young male. Unauthorized access. Possibly forged credentials." The words hit like thunder. Intruder. Forged. Unauthorized. Miles blinked. He was just a kid who loved planes. Now he was being treated like a threat. The badge he had worn with pride now lay clenched in the captain's fist. No longer a symbol of promise, but of doubt. Outside the lounge, airport staff began to peer in, drawn by the tension. Whispers formed. Eyes locked onto him, not with wonder, but with wariness. Miles could feel his world shrinking by the second. He raised his voice slightly, not with anger, but urgency. "Please, could you call Ms. Nguyen? She's just outside. She can explain." Beckett didn't even glance at him. "I know what I'm looking at," she muttered to herself. "I've flown for 22 years. I've seen all kinds of stunts. And this is a security breach." Miles looked around the room, hoping someone, anyone, would intervene. But no one did. They just watched, silently. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone. One call, he thought. One person who knows me. Who knows this isn't who I am, he dialed. And in his heart, he prayed, "Dad, please pick up." The phone rang once, Twice. Each chime seemed to stretch longer than the last, echoing in Miles's mind like a countdown he couldn't stop. He stood in the middle of the pilot's lounge, feeling the heat of every stare on his back. Yet the room had gone so quiet it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. His fingers tightened around the phone. His throat was dry. On the third ring, a voice answered. "Miles, what's wrong?" That voice, calm, steady, unmistakable, cut through the panic like a lifeline. Miles could barely speak. His voice cracked as the words tumbled out. "Dad, I'm at the airport. They say I don't belong here. They think I faked my badge." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that didn't need words, the kind only a father and son understood. Then, "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." He didn't shout, he didn't panic, he didn't ask questions. Because Andre Carter, the man on the other end of the line, wasn't just Miles's father. He was the administrator of the Federal Aviation Security Bureau, the man who oversaw safety protocols at airports across the nation. But none of that mattered to Miles at that moment. He just needed his father. He lowered the phone, clutching it to his chest, taking a shaky breath. Captain Beckett still stood to the side, arms folded tightly, as if guarding something only she had the right to define. Her eyes rolled with visible contempt. "Oh, so now you call your daddy," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me guess, he's on his way from the janitor's closet?" The jab landed like a slap. A few in the room exchanged glances. No one laughed, but no one spoke up either. Miles didn't answer. He just stood there, the knot in his throat too tight to swallow. He wanted to say something, anything, but he knew deep down that no argument would change her mind. Because this wasn't about a badge. It never was. It was about who he was, and more importantly, who she believed he could never be. The door creaked open again. Two uniformed security officers stepped inside. Tall, impassive, clipboard in one hand, restraint in the other. One glanced at Miles, then at Captain Beckett. "That him?" the officer asked. Beckett didn't hesitate. "Yes, he's trespassing. ID appears forged. Might be part of something bigger. We need to check for intent." Intent. As if Miles Carter, 16, scrawny, carrying a backpack filled with nothing but his journal and an aviation textbook, was some sort of covert threat. Miles took a slow step back. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. His voice was steady this time, but soft. "Miss Nguyen told me I could wait here. She gave me this badge. You can call her. She's right outside." One officer raised a hand. "We'll need to verify that. Please come with us." But the other, slightly younger officer hesitated. He studied Miles's face, the tension in his hands, the panic he was trying so hard to suppress. Something was unsettling in the stillness, a kind of quiet plea that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Still, procedure prevailed. "Please step outside, son." Miles didn't move. His hands were shaking. His heart beat like a drum against his ribs. Captain Beckett, emboldened by their presence, turned toward the small group that had gathered outside the lounge. "Let this be a reminder," she said loudly, "that security matters more than comfort. We cannot afford to be naive. This is exactly how breaches happen, when we let anyone walk in and assume the best." Miles heard those words and felt himself shrinking inside them. They weren't just about him anymore. They were about every other kid who looked like him, every dream that was dismissed before it could even speak. The officer took another step forward. Miles held his ground, eyes locked on the door, waiting. He whispered to himself, "He's coming. Just hold on." But deep down, he couldn't help wondering, what if even his father wasn't enough? For a moment, the hallway outside the pilot's lounge felt like the edge of a cliff. One more word, one more breath, and Miles might fall. The officer stood poised, unsure whether to proceed. Captain Lorraine Beckett had resumed her posture of righteous authority, one hand on her hip, the other gripping the confiscated badge like it were a trophy. The room was heavy with anticipation, but not the kind that brings hope, the kind that comes just before a verdict. Then came the voice, not through the door, not from behind. It came first through the crackling of the officer's radio, sharp and unmistakable. All units, stand by. FAA command official en route to pilot lounge. Clearance confirmed. Repeat, FAA command official en route. Every head turned. The younger officer lowered his radio, blinking. Captain Beckett frowned. FAA? She repeated, confused. Before she could finish her thought, the lounge door swung open. The footsteps were swift, steady, measured, like they belonged to someone who had no interest in performing authority, only embodying it. Andre Carter entered without ceremony. He wore a Navy overcoat, FAA credentials clipped to his chest. Behind him trailed two senior officials and a protocol officer, but they kept a respectful distance. Because everyone in the room already knew, this man didn't need an introduction. Even those who didn't recognize his face felt the shift, the kind of silence that falls when the real captain steps into the cockpit. Miles saw him, and for the first time in what felt like hours, he exhaled. His father crossed the room in 5 long strides and stopped directly in front of him, placing a calm but steady hand on his son's shoulder. "Miles," he said softly, "are you hurt?" Miles shook his head, eyes glassy but steady. "No, sir, just scared." Andre Carter nodded once, then turned, and his voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Who accused my son of breaching federal airspace regulations with a fake credential?" Captain Beckett's composure cracked for the first time. She blinked rapidly. I didn't know he was your son," she said quickly. "I was just following protocol, a minor, unaccompanied. Suspicious ID." "Suspicious?" Andre cut in, his voice still calm but colder now. "Did you verify it? Did you ask for his guide? Did you even check with HR?" "He was alone in the lounge," Beckett insisted. "This is a secure area. I assumed." "That's precisely the problem." Andre's tone dropped, razor sharp. "You didn't ask, you assumed. Based on what? His age, his badge, or the color of his skin?" The entire room froze. Even the officers took a step back. Beckett opened her mouth but found no answer. Andre Carter straightened, turning to face the assembled staff. "I am Andre Carter, administrator of the Federal Aviation Security Bureau. The badge you tore from my son's neck and was issued through a program I helped design to diversify and prepare the next generation of pilots. Every protocol you ignored wasn't just a lapse in procedure. It was a betrayal of everything this industry claims to stand for." The badge, still in Beckett's hand, suddenly felt heavy. "I had no idea," she started, voice brittle. "That," Andre said, eyes locked on her, "is the most dangerous excuse in any uniform." He turned to the officers next. "You had full authority to verify his credentials, yet you deferred to a personal bias instead of standard procedure. Is that what training has become at Sky Nova?" One of the officers looked down, ashamed. "No, sir, we apologize. Deeply." Andre nodded once, then gently he turned back to Miles. "Son, I need you to stand tall now, not because of who I am, but because of who you are." Miles swallowed hard. The pain was still there, but in that moment, so was something else. Dignity. It had returned, and this time he wouldn't let it go. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. The lounge, once ruled by suspicion and silent judgment, now stood still beneath the weight of accountability. Captain Lorraine Beckett held the torn badge like it burned in her palm. She looked at Andre Carter, not as a subordinate to a superior, but as someone finally realizing she'd been standing at the edge of a cliff the entire time, and now the ground beneath her was giving way. Andre turned to the protocol officer at his side. Run the footage, he said quietly. The man opened a tablet, connected it to the lounge monitor, and with a few taps, the screen flickered to life. A hush fell over the room as the timestamp footage began to play. There it was. Miles entering the lounge calmly alongside Ms. Tanya Nguyen, the HR director. She handed him a badge, gestured to the seating area, and left. Not a single misstep, no wandering, no disruption. Just a boy sitting quietly, watching a documentary about aviation history. Then came the part that made the room physically shift. Captain Beckett entering, confronting Miles, snatching his badge, and calling security without so much as a verification. The room watched in full color what prejudice looked like when it wrapped itself in the uniform of professionalism. As the video ended, a soft murmur spread like ripples in still water. Someone whispered, "She never asked him a single real question." Andre didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That recording will be sent to the FAA Ethics Review, Skynova Legal, and the Department of Civil Aviation Oversight. But more urgently, Miles, I want you to know what just happened to you today isn't about whether or not you belong here. It's about the system forgetting it was built to serve people like you too. Captain Beckett opened her mouth, desperation overtaking pride. Mr. Carter, this was never meant to harm anyone. I've served for over 20 years. I've always protected the flight deck, followed every protocol. Andre turned toward her slowly. And yet in 20 years, did you ever protect the dreams of someone who didn't look like you? She flinched. I didn't know who he was, she offered, voice cracking. He nodded just once. Calm then. And if he hadn't been my son, would anyone here have spoken up for him? No one answered, because the silence said everything they needed. From behind Andre, another FAA official stepped forward. We've completed a preliminary review of internal conduct reports for Captain Beckett, he announced. Over the last 3 years, 3 separate complaints have been filed. 2 by employees of color, 1 by a trainee. All dismissed quietly, but documented. The gas that followed wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Captain Beckett's face turned pale. No, those were misunderstandings, she whispered. Unfounded. They're being reopened, the official said flatly. Andre glanced at her one last time. His voice, though still calm, dropped an octave. We don't build a safer sky by patrolling it with fear. We build it by holding ourselves to the standard we expect of the people who trust us with their lives. He then addressed the room. Pilots, officers, and staff all stood quietly, eyes lowered, as if the very ceiling of the lounge now reflected something truer than rank or seniority. Miles stood here alone for over an hour, Andre said. Not because we lack protocol, but because too many of us lack the courage to use it with fairness. He looked down at his son, placed a hand on his shoulder once more. But he didn't break. And because of that, neither will this moment. Miles didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. But inside, something steady was rebuilding. Not the confidence of a child, but the quiet strength of someone who had faced injustice and remained standing. The silence in the pilot's lounge was no longer hostile. It was contemplative, now weighted, reflective. Not the quiet of judgment, but the quiet of awakening. Captain Lorraine Beckett stood frozen, the illusion of authority unraveling with each second. Her decades of service, once worn like a badge of pride, now hung around her like a heavy coat soaked in guilt. The room no longer looked at her with admiration. It looked through her with disappointment, even pity. The FAA ethics officer approached Andre Carter, voice steady but decisive. Mr. Carter, he said, pending a formal investigation, Captain Beckett will be suspended from all active flight duties effective immediately. 2 security personnel stepped forward, not harsh, not theatrical, just procedure, this time applied fairly. Captain, one said softly, we'll need you to come with us. She looked around once more, but no one met her gaze. There were no defenders left. As she walked past Miles, her eyes flickered, trying to find something. Regret, perhaps. But the boy had already looked away, not out of anger but clarity. He didn't need her apology. Some truths can't be spoken. They have to be lived through. The moment she left, the room finally breathed again. Andre turned toward his son and spoke, not as a federal official, but as a father. You were alone and you stood your ground, not with rage, not with shouting, but with patience, truth, and belief in yourself. That takes more strength than most adults I know. Miles looked up, lips pressed tightly together. I wasn't sure I could hold on, he whispered. Andre nodded. You did. And now, because of that, so many others will never have to go through what you just did. At that moment, a calm voice called from the door. Excuse me, Miles? They turned. Captain Jamila Ross, a black female pilot with salt and pepper curls tucked beneath her cap, stepped forward. She was a legend in aviation circles, not just for her flying skills, but for mentoring underrepresented youth in aviation. I watched what happened, she said gently, and I've also lived through it. She walked toward Miles with purpose and kindness, then extended a hand. I'm flying the next long haul to Frankfurt, and I'd be honored if you joined me in the cockpit for a real pre-flight walkthrough. You deserve to see the sky from the front. Miles's eyes widened. He looked at his father, who smiled and gave a slight nod. Captain Ross smiled. We belong up there too, and I think it's time someone reminded the sky of that. Together they walked out. As they moved down the hallway, one seasoned captain, one aspiring pilot, the atmosphere around them shifted, no longer whispers, no more sidelong glances, only quiet respect. Even some of the staff who had been complicit earlier came forward, one offering a quiet, I'm sorry, another patting Miles on the shoulder with unexpected sincerity. The door to the aircraft opened. The cockpit lights shimmered like a constellation waiting to be navigated. Miles stepped inside, breath held, heart wide open. And for the first time since he arrived at the airport, he felt seen not as a problem to be solved, but as a pilot in the making. The life lesson. Discrimination often wears a polished badge and a practiced smile. It doesn't always scream. It sometimes whispers behind doors of assumption. But dignity doesn't need permission to stand tall. Miles Carter didn't win by yelling or demanding power. He won by refusing to surrender his truth. He won by letting the storm pass and still standing. The skies do not belong to the loudest. They belong to the boldest. And sometimes the most powerful flight is the one you take by simply refusing to back down. For every young person told you don't belong here, this story answers, yes, you do.